Week 7 of the fantasy football season. And here's the top 36 running backs. I'm ranking this week. The first guy, Austin Ekeler of the Los Angeles Chargers. So over the last 3 weeks of the season here, he's been the best running back in fantasy football. Here's Austin Ekeler. And he's got another great matchup versus the Seattle Seahawks, who can't stop anybody on the ground. So this week here, Ekeler wouldn't be surprising to me if he has a number one performance, 25-30 fantasy points. And he's locked in as the number one running back this week. Number 2, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. So this Giant offense goes where Barkley goes, and he's been a fantasy stud this season. Obviously, we always knew he was talented and a big playmaker. And even without outside weapons that are threats really on New York, Saquon Barkley makes big plays, always has that big 30, 40-yard run, and he finds the end zone, it seems like, each and every week. And this week here with another great matchup at Jacksonville, he'll have a monster game. Number 3, Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers. So Christian McCaffrey, we know he's been one of the best running backs over the last 4 or 5 seasons in the league. And injuries have just been the concern for him. But this season so far, he's played in every game. And he's putting up the Pat and McCaffrey ball game, 100 yards from scrimmage, 7-8 catches each and every week, and a touchdown. And this week, I know a tough matchup versus Tampa Bay coming to town, but he's matchup proof, and I got him at 3. Number 4, Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. So Henry, the first couple weeks of the season, got off to a slow start for this Titan team, but he's really kicked it into gear in week 4 and 5, then going on to bye week. And right now, they've been using him in the passing game more as well, with a lot of bubble screens and just short plays for Derrick Henry. So this week versus Indianapolis in a division matchup where both these teams are atop the standings right now, this could be another good one for Derrick Henry. And I got him for number 5, Leonard Fournette of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Fournette, over the last 3 weeks now, since they've been passing the ball more to him, he's been putting up huge fantasy numbers, and he's been a top flight number 1 running back the last few weeks is Fournette. Even last week, where they didn't score much or do much, he had 22 fantasy points because he's catching 6-7 passes out of the backfield, like I said, on average the last 3 weeks of the season. So this week, what a good matchup for Carolina, even though I think this Tampa team's going to come out aggressive throwing early in this one. Leonard Fournette's going to have a good ball game once again, and you fire him up as a number 1 running back, and I got him at 5. Number 6, Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. So remember, in the preseason, they were down on Jacobs. They wanted Zamir White to take over. Brandon Bolden was playing some snaps early in the season a lot, but Josh Jacobs, the last couple weeks in week 4 and 5, he really got things going with over 35 fantasy points in those ball games. So right here, another good matchup here for him versus the Houston Texans. And he fits this offense like a glove here, where they could play off Jacobs and Davante Adams as their top 2 options over there in Las Vegas. And this week with a great matchup versus the Texans, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes over 100 yards for the 3rd time in a row and finds the end zone. Number 7, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So to be honest here, they don't need Damien Harris as a guy splitting with Stevenson anymore. He's more than capable of carrying the workload, and we've seen it the last 2 weeks here, where he's had over 23 touches in these ball games, and Stevenson going over 100 yards and finding the end zone. Last week, I know he was bottled up early in the ball game, but as the game goes on, with his physical running ability, this guy gets defenses tired and he breaks away. So last week, he had a monster ball game once again, and this week on Monday Night Football, Harris might come back from the hamstring, he might not, but I'm still putting him in there as a top flight running back. I got him at 7, and he has a good ball game once again versus the Bears. Number 8, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. So last week was the worst game of the season here for Nick Chubb, but I'm not worried about it. The game got out of hand. They lost 38-15 to the Patriots, and they're a great defense, New England, no doubt about it. That's one thing they always have over there in New England. But anyway, this week, a division matchup at the Baltimore Ravens, where it's going to be a physical, grinded out type of game. But Nick Chubb, one of the best running backs, 5 games out of 6 this year, 100 yards over scrimmage, and I got him at 8. Number 9, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Jonathan Taylor, we know he's injured. We know he struggled the first few weeks of the season, but this week here, if he comes back in a crucial division game, even though I know it's only week 7, I think he could have a good ball game at the Tennessee Titans. He's still a top talent. He's still a great running back, and maybe they could utilize him a little like they did with Deion Jackson last week, who went off for 28 fantasy points, filling in for Jonathan Taylor. So Taylor, if he comes back, I still like him this week. Hopefully he's healthy and 100%. And I got him at 9. Number 10, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. So we know the Saints don't have their full arsenal of weapons. Michael Thomas has been out for weeks. Olave missed last week's game, but he should be back. Landry, he's probably going to miss this game. And at quarterback, we'll see if it's going to be Jameis or Dalton. But the last 2 weeks here, Kamara's got things going finally. After a lot of people spent the low first, early second round pick on him in their fantasy draft. So this week here, indoor game, Thursday Night Football at Arizona. I know these Thursday Night Football games have been a slop fest the last few weeks, especially here. But I think Kamara is still a pretty solid option as a number one running back for your fantasy team. And obviously, he's a dual threat, catching the ball out of the backfield and hitting that hole. So right now, I got him at 10. The only thing that could be a problem is goal line, where we've seen Taysom Hill come in and take those snaps. Number 11, Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. So a good matchup this week here for Joe Mixon versus the Atlanta Falcons. And Mixon, we know he's a good talent, no doubt about it. Last week, it was good to see him find the end zone on the slant route versus the Saints here. And this week versus a weak Falcon team back at home, I think Mixon could possibly rumble for 100 yards in this one. Good running back the last few years here for fantasy. And I got him at 11. Number 12, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So over the last few weeks here, Breece Hall's jumped up the rankings here in fantasy football, and he's been a top flight running back. He's been playing like last week in a tough matchup versus Green Bay. It was no problem for the youngster here. And this guy was the first running back off the board in the NFL draft for a reason. So this week here, I think his numbers aren't going to be as good because this Denver Bronco team, if there's one thing legit about them, it's this defense, no doubt about it. But Breece Hall each and every week's a top 10, top 15 option, no doubt about it. And this week at Denver, he still could break out big runs, I think. But I wouldn't be surprised if they bottle up for most of the ball game and then he breaks one as the game goes on. But he's been a great running back and a guy, to be honest, I wasn't big on coming into the season. But I'll admit I was wrong with Breece Hall so far. Number 13, another rookie who I like a lot, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker, to be honest, I know Rashard Penny's a decent talent, but since week one, Walker should have been the starting running back over there in Seattle. And now with Penny out for the year and probably not coming back next season, with Walker taking the job and running with it probably here, I got him at 13. A great matchup at the Chargers, giving up tons of fantasy points to running backs on the season. And last week, Kenneth Walker, he just showed what he could do in this offense. He has Le'Veon Bell patience, where he waits in that hole, scatters around a little, and then boom, he hits it hard. And that's what he did last week with Kenneth Walker plenty of times in that ball game versus Arizona. So last week he had 21 carries for 97 yards and he found the end zone. And this week here at the Chargers, I think he could do damage once again. And I like him as a low-end number one running back, high two this week at the Chargers. At 13, number 14, Damien Pearce, another rookie. So a lot of rookie running backs are taking the league by storm quickly here in the first 7 weeks of the season. So Pearce, he's had some monster fantasy games before their bye week last week with 20 or more fantasy points. So this week here, Vegas, I think we're going to see Pearce get a big workload once again. Anywhere from 18 to 20 carries, catch a few balls out of the backfield. Then every week, he's a number 2 running back on your team easily, is Damien Pearce. And a guy I like a lot at 14, number 15, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. So this Packer offense has been in shambles over the last 2 weeks of the season. And Aaron Jones, his numbers have gone down. But I'm going to tell you something. I think he's a perfect buy low candidate this week here is Aaron Jones. I know this week's a good matchup at Washington. So if you're going to want to buy him low, this would be the time before this game, because it wouldn't be surprising to me if the Packers try to make a statement in this game and they just keep running that football 25, 30 times between Jones and A.J. Dillon in this one. So right now, Aaron Jones, we know he's a great talent. We know he's drafted early. Last year had a good year. And even the first 4 weeks of the season was solid. But I think this week could be a bounce back for him. And I got him at 15, 16, DeAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. So Swift could be coming back in this ball game finally for this Lion team. After missing multiple weeks, and Swift got off to the hot start first 2-3 weeks of the season before he went down with injury. He's a great talent. Him and Jamal Williams is a good 1-2 tandem over there in Detroit. And this Lion team, they could use Swift to eat the clock up a little. A lot of ball games where it just got out of hand and they had to throw 50, 60 times a game. So right here, Swift at Dallas is definitely a tough matchup for a return game here for him. But at worst, he's a number 2 running back. Number 17 staying in the same game, Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. So now with Dak Prescott back most likely this week here, it'll open everything up for this Cowboy offense. Teams won't be loading the box as much. And Zeke Elliott, he might even get back to catching some passes out of the backfield. With Cooper Rush, it just wasn't happening with him or Tony Pollard catching passes out of the backfield. So right now, Elliott, he's looked strong over the last few weeks, getting to that second level, keeping those legs going, breaking some tackles. And he's actually been fresh, I think, splitting a little bit with Pollard. He's still getting that 60-40 balance is Ezekiel Elliott. But now with Dak back in the lineup here, I think we see more goal line plays here with Zeke, find the end zone more. That's just been the problem for him this season. And more explosive running as well. So right now this Cowboy team played well with Dak out. And now 4-2 with him back. I think this whole offense gets upgraded, obviously, in fantasy football. And I got Elliott this week at 17-18. Jeff Wilson Jr. of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jeff Wilson Jr., he's been pretty solid this season. I know last week was a fluky game. They had to chase points. And yes, this week they probably will once again versus Kansas City. But last week it was just ordinary type of ball game for the San Francisco 49er team. And Jeff Wilson Jr., he's filled in very well, I believe, here for Elijah Mitchell. Even if Mitchell comes back, I don't think he should be the starter. He's been injury prone. I know he's a talented running back, but Jeff Wilson Jr. definitely could hold it down. And this week here, I think he could have a good ball game versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But I just want to see a little more receiving from Wilson out of the backfield. That's one thing they're not doing a lot with him over there in San Francisco. Catching passes, setting up screens. And if they could do that and utilize him in that way as well, he could be a great running back this week, because this Chief team is definitely leaky, and they're not the greatest at defense. They just do enough to hold down and win ball games for their offense. 19, David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. So last week, Montgomery, he was operating as the full-blown number one running back over there for Chicago at the Washington Commanders, where he had a big ball game in terms of workload compared to Khalil Herbert, who only got a handful of touches, but had a good game running because he had that 160-plus yard run was Herbert in that one. So this week, it's definitely a tough matchup on Monday Night Football versus New England. But Montgomery, with his workload and the knack to find the end zone most weeks than not, I got him in 19, number 20, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. So Robinson, I like what we saw from him last week. Big physical back, a guy who's looking to break tackles, and he's not scared to hit that second level and get going. So right now, Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissic didn't show much the first 5 weeks of the season when Robinson didn't play. And right away, Ron Rivera threw him in there as the number one bell cow, getting 17 touches, and he did find the end zone in that game. So this week, I know not a great matchup versus Green Bay, but he's definitely a number two running back option just on workload and volume alone, where I think he could carve out 12, 15 points in this one. 21, Eno Benjamin of the Arizona Cardinals. So James Conner, he hasn't practiced so far in the early going this week. And this ball game is Thursday Night Football here. Eno Benjamin looked not so great last week, but another guy with volume and workload alone is going to get some plays. And this New Orleans team, not the greatest of teams on defense. We saw Joe Mixon have a good game last week. We saw Dalvin Cook a few weeks ago cut him up over there for the Saints. And I think this week Benjamin, as a number two running back, is perfect. He can catch passes out of the backfield. Last week he had 15 carries. And now with Hopkins back in the lineup, and even Robbie Anderson, if they use him a little bit, is a deep threat. This offense hasn't missed a beat, even with Hollywood out. And it could open things up for Benjamin. And just like I said, volume and workload will be enough for him to be solid. 22, Naji Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Naji Harris, he's been a bust, no doubt about it this season here. It's not 100% his fault, but he's been injured with the foot playing through it. Got the plate removed a couple weeks ago. And this offensive line's been bad. But last week, Jalen Warren, he was in there a lot. Even though I know he only had 2 touches. Naji Harris, he didn't do much. Luckily, he was wide open on an out route for like 6 yards in the end zone. But besides that, he didn't do anything. And this week here, it's going to be a physical matchup at the Miami Dolphins that have been pretty decent versus the run game. So right now, Naji Harris as a borderline number 2 running back, yeah, but if you don't score a touchdown, he's a guy really only getting 6-7 fantasy points a week. So somehow, if you could trade him off, this would be the time, because we're already in week 7. No doubt he could break out, but I don't think that's going to happen with Harris. Warren, he's looked like the better running back in terms of running through the tackles and quickness this season. Number 23, James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Robinson, it's been a horrible last few weeks here for him, where he's failed to reach 6 fantasy points in the time. But Robinson here, they got to get back to the basics over there in Jacksonville. They got to run the football a little more. I think they're getting a little too pass happy, a little over creative with this offense over here. And they just got to run through the tackles. And James Robinson is that guy. I know Hasty last week had a fluky 61-yard touchdown that took obviously a lot of work on the one drive away from Robinson. But right here, decent matchup versus the Giants. You know it's going to be a grinded out type of game. Those are all the games the Giants are winning right now. Tight ball games to the fourth quarter, and both running backs are going to run a lot. So right here, I got Robinson at 23, and if he don't deliver this week, then he's a guy you can't count on as a starter. Number 24, Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. So Raheem Mostert, believe it or not, he's looked real well this season here and totally took all the running back work away from Chase Edmonds, who's the drop candidate now. So Mostert is a number 2 running back. I think this week versus the Steelers is a solid option. We saw Leonard Fournette have another big game last week versus the Steelers team. And the Steelers team, they're hanging on a thread as well, where they pulled that ball game out. But this week here, I think Miami gets on track. Mostert's been running well, and he's getting a big workload. So on workload and the decent running we've seen from him, he's solid at 24. 25, Jamal Williams of the Detroit Lions. If DeAndre Swift don't play in this game, he will be up more in the rankings here. But I think Swift comes back in this one. They're coming off the bye week. He had 3-4 weeks off now with Swift. And Jamal Williams, he filled in very well for DeAndre Swift. He's a big physical back. He's still going to be short yardage and probably goal line. So as a flex option or low-end number 2, we can't be that horrible this week as a play as Jamal Williams. Well, right here, if Swift's back, obviously workload is going to be gone from him. And it's a tough matchup at Dallas. But this week I got him at 25. 26, Kareem Hunt of the Cleveland Browns. So Kareem Hunt last week, he didn't do anything in that ball game. And this season, the numbers have gone down. Nick Chubb's finally getting more of a workload in the goal line work here. And Kareem Hunt, he's been a borderline 2 flex option pretty much the whole season. But this week here, Baltimore, I think he could have a decent ball game. I think he could be serviceable. Last week, I know he had 2-3 fantasy points in that one. I don't think his floor is going to be that low. Anywhere from 7 to 10 is definitely a possibility. And they got to use him better in the receiving game here. I know Brissett's looking at Cooper and David Njoku a lot in the receiving game over there. But right here, Kareem Hunt could still help in that way. And this week at Baltimore, it's going to be a grinded out type of game where they're going to have to do things like that. So I got him at 26, 27, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Etienne, a lot of high hopes for people coming into the season for him as a rookie. Well, really his rookie year now after last year missing the whole year after tearing the Achilles in training camp. So Etienne, a lot of people thought he would take over. But both running backs have struggled. Last week, if he didn't get that 50-yard plus run, is Etienne, he would have had another bad fantasy game. So this week is a borderline 2 flex option, maybe. But this Giant defense has been pretty stout. And Travis Etienne, I just think he's been overrated coming into the season. He was a guy that I said to avoid. And so far, if I said something correct, it was about him because he really hasn't had a huge fantasy game. And James Robinson's always going to be there as the in-between tackles guy. So right now, 27-28, Clyde Edwards-Hilaire of the Kansas City Chiefs. To talk about Edwards-Hilaire, he's the running back that's the most touchdown dependent this season here. If he don't find the end zone, he don't do anything for fantasy owners. And that obviously came true over the last 2 weeks here, where he's been under 5 fantasy points in both ball games. So CEH here, he's still the number 1 back over there. We see Jerry McKinnon obviously get work, and Isaiah Pacheco, who they like a lot over there, where honestly I think he should take over sooner than later at running back is Pacheco. He's a big physical back. He can handle that 20-30 carry workload if you need him, and he could even catch the ball out of the backfield. But right here in a tough matchup at San Francisco, if you got better options, CEH is nothing more than a borderline 2 flex option. 29, Octavius Murray of the Denver Broncos. So Murray, they signed him off the Saints practice squad a couple weeks ago, and he got thrown into the fire in the second half of that ball game, and he looked like the better running back. Murray, he's got that physicality to him. He's got speed. He runs over defenders. And this Bronco team here, I know they got Mike Boone and Gordon in the mix, but obviously you saw a second half of that game, Melvin Gordon shaking his head with his helmet off on the sidelines, and Murray had a good workload with 15 carries in the game, 66 yards. And versus the New York Jets, you're going to have to play smash mouth in this one, especially if Russell Wilson's not going to be 100% in this ball game, or even possibly miss the ball game. We'll see what happens as the week goes on. But right here is a low-end 2 flex option. I got Murray at 29, number 30, Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. So right now, Dak Prescott probably coming back this week here and it just opens everything up for everybody. But we've seen Tony Pollard have some decent ball games this week, but this week is a flex option. I think he's solid versus a weak Detroit Lion defense here, where you could shred him on the ground. So Tony Pollard's an explosive running back. At this point of his career, I think he's more versatile and a better running back than Ezekiel. He could do a little bit more, could catch the ball out of the backfield, could hit that second level quicker, and he's got that playmaker breakaway speed. So right now with Dak back in the lineup and Detroit defense weak this season, I think Pollard could be a good number 2 running back or flex option, but I'll keep it safe with him at 31, J.K. Dobbins of the Baltimore Ravens. So we don't know what's going to happen with Dobbins here, but this season it's been nothing but a headache for fantasy owners, except for 1 week versus the Buffalo Bills, I believe in week 4. He had 15 fantasy points, but besides that, he's getting the workload and he didn't do anything. And then last week, leaving that game versus the Giants early, and Kenyon Drake taking over with 10 carries for 119 yards and a touchdown. So Drake, I know what you're going to get from Drake. I think it was a fluky game. I know the Giants haven't been great versus the run this season. We've seen them get carved up a little bit, but right now, J.K. Dobbins, it's concerning. A lot of people spent the 4th, 5th round pick on him. And this week here, not a great matchup as well. This Brown team, they got a good front line, obviously, headlined by Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. So right here, Dobbins, I got him at 31, 32, A.J. Dillon of the Green Bay Packers. A.J. Dillon, it's been a disappointment. This season, I thought he'd be a perfect number 2 running back for fantasy owners. Week 1, he got the good workload, 23 fantasy points. But ever since then, he hasn't done anything as A.J. Dillon. And Aaron Jones, even the last couple weeks. This Packer offense don't have an identity. Offensive line's banged up as well, not doing much. And Dillon at this point, you can't really expect much. Maybe 8 to 10 fantasy points at best you're going to get from Dillon. And he's a low-end 2 flex option at 32, 33, Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. So right here, it's been a pretty much full-blown 50-50 split since Cordell Patterson's been out, with Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley. So right now, not a great matchup at Cincinnati. A ball game where they're probably going to be chasing points is Atlanta, even though I thought that last week versus San Francisco, and they blew the doors off, beating them 28-14. But right here, Algier last week had less carries than Caleb Huntley. And to be honest, right now, Huntley looks like the more physical and better running back over there in Atlanta. But right now, they want to give the rookie that they drafted pretty high in the NFL draft the first crack and more opportunities. But I got Algier 33 and 34. I got Caleb Huntley back-to-back Falcon running backs in the rankings here. Huntley, like I said, looked like the more physical back. He looked like the goal line guy over there. And hey, this Falcon team, maybe they're waiting for one of these guys to break out, and this could be the week here where Huntley could do it. So right now, if Huntley's on your waiver wire, which he should be, available in over 90% of fantasy leagues, if I got a bench spot, I would stash this guy, because it wouldn't be surprising to me if he takes over in a week or 2. If Algier continues not to do much and not looking like he has a lot of juice, because Huntley looked like he had juice in that ball game. 35, Kenyon Drake of the Baltimore Ravens. So Kenyon Drake coming off the big ball game, like I mentioned earlier. 10 carries, 119 yards, and a touchdown. This week, a tough matchup versus Cleveland. And another thing, Lamar Jackson, he's going to take most of the running over there. So we saw Drake the first 2 weeks of the season have a good role, but he didn't do much with it. And last week was just a fluky thing, I think, as well versus the New York Giants. Dobbins left the game. Giants probably thought nothing of Kenyon Drake coming in. They were worried about stopping Lamar and selling out on that. And Drake, he broke a couple big runs and had a good game. But this week here, he's a low-end 2 flex option in deeper leagues. And I got him at 35, and the 36th and final running back I'm ranking this week here is Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos. I mentioned it, Latavius Murray's second half of that ball game on Monday Night Football in Week 6 at the Chargers. He came in, he looked like the more physical back. He looked like a back that could hit that second level productive running back. And Melvin Gordon, he was just on the sideline shaking his head and disappointed. And we didn't see him the rest of the ball game, and it was a close ball game. So right here, I think Gordon, they'll mix him in once again here. Hackett said they're going to use all 3 running backs, but Mike Boone, he barely saw anything in this. He's going to be a change of pace guy, is Boone, at best. Ball game, he only saw 4 looks total, 3 targets, and 1 carry. So right here, Mike Boone, he's not on the radar. He was dropped in tons of fantasy leagues. And Melvin Gordon right now, it looks like he's the number 2 back over there after Murray getting the big workload. So I got him at 36 just in case he gets back on track. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 7 of the fantasy football season.